Καλώς ήλθατε. Είμαι ο Γιώργος Καραγιάννης και ακούτε το Branding for Greeks, το πρώτο ελληνικό podcast για τα brand και το branding. Μια ευκαιρία να μιλήσουμε για το πώς χτίζονται τα brand και πώς τα αντιλαμβανόμαστε. Τι είναι το branding, ποια εργαλεία χρησιμοποιεί και πώς μπορεί στην πράξη να βοηθήσει επιχειρήσεις, από μια startup μέχρι μια πολυεθνική, να μεγαλώσουν την αξία των brand που διαχειρίζονται.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Branding for Greeks, the podcast where we unpack how strategy, creativity and design come together to build brands people remember. And I am George Karagiannis, your host. Since branding is actually such a crucial part of how brand value is created today, and designers play a pivotal role in shaping that value, I thought it was time to go back to where it all begins, design education. Because design is evolving rapidly, on one hand we have, let's say, UX design, motion design, social impact, and of course now AI, which is constantly expanding the list of must-have skills for any young designer. And on the other hand, some fundamentals never go out of style, like visual literacy, form, composition, grids, synthesis, critical thinking, and problem solving. So, how does education keep up? How do young designers acquire the skills they need in such a fast-paced environment, especially when, with so many online tools and courses, many people start to lose faith in traditional education models? To help us explore all of this, I invited Lefteris Heretakis. Lefteris is a Greek-born designer with a 25-year career in design and 16 in design education. He has taught, lectured and run workshops in more than 10 countries like UK, China and across Europe. He's currently senior lecturer in visual communication at Liverpool John Moore University, and founder of the New Art School and the Design Education Forum. And honestly, the list goes on. He's also a fellow podcaster, though I say that with humility because he has way more experience than I do. And I highly recommend his podcast, Design Education Talks, where he is hosted global industry professionals and, if I may say so, design legends like Mike Dempsey, Simon Dixon, Michael Johnson, and so many others. And while we are both Greek, today's conversation will be in English. Lefteris has spent many years abroad, and the terminology just flows better that way. Lefteris, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much, George. It's such a huge honor to be here. Thank you so much.
Probably you should say also some things about yourself, because the list I've gone through, it's small.
No. I'm a designer, I'm an educator, I'm a podcaster, and I'm just working for the benefit of improving design education across the world right now, because we're in such a pivotal moment. We're such a real pivotal moment.
That's true. Let's jump right away to the core of our discussion today. How do you currently define your role as a design educator?
Okay, we started with the heavy ones. Now, the role of a design educator today is very complex, because also education has become quite complex. So it depends, of course, on where and how one is teaching. I gave a talk a few years ago about the difference between, for example, private universities and public universities. There's such a disparity. There's such a huge difference in the way things are done. But we're not going to go there. But my role as design educator is to really help students to find themselves, to find their personal way of expression through a highly complex world.
Yeah, that's true. Truly a highly complex word. I was listening to some of your podcasts, some episodes of your podcast, and it was amazing when I came across, I think there are two of them, the two last of them, the one with Mike Dempsey and the other one with Lisa D. And I think those two episodes, if someone would listen to them, actually will realize the big difference in the design industry and design education in our days. I mean, on the one hand, we had Mike Dempsey, a legend who was never actually learned design in a design school. But he was learning by sitting to other designers and looking at what they were doing and keep working on his skills and his craft work all the time. And on the other hand, we have Lisa D, where she was talking passionately about metaverse and about digital evolution, etc. And how these two words come together in education today?
That's a very good question. There are many paths. It's much harder now to start self-taught.
Yeah,
because there's so many options, and of course, online videos are very misleading because unless you know the information, unless you know how to guide yourself through the information. Basically, design education is an accelerator. The student is doing the learning always, but in a good environment, this can be accelerated rapidly. So while somebody who's very keen could potentially do it on their own, it'll take them much longer. And also joining a community of like-minded people is also a very powerful accelerator. So peer learning. So I think that there are many paths. I think that a keen student always needs a mentor. There are paths and parts of design and art and design that one can succeed through just working. I think that, for example, in many countries right now, students have to do a job for money and also study. And that's a really, really tough one, because what tends to happen is that they don't do anything to the degree that's necessary. I think that a student should either be working and be on the job and try to go that way. Or if it's possible in design education, you need to be fully immersed into that. Of course, when we were students, we were given that luxury. Our education was 9 to 5 every day, Monday to Friday, constantly. So there was no discussion. There are some universities in some countries that give the illusion that they're doing design education, whereas something much, much more difficult. Right now there's the illusion that this is an easy thing, but I say that this is much harder than doing medicine or other things.
I really like what you said in the beginning, that actually education is an accelerator of, it's something that I do agree. When I was a student at the School of Graphic and Visual Arts in Athens, I was also young and bold, and as most of us at that age. Every semester, we worked on exercises in color painting and freehand drawing. And I remember asking one of my professors at the time, it was the time before computers, not before, just starting to emerge in graphic design. And I asked him why we are still spending so much time on these traditional practices. His answer was, he said, George, how long do you think it takes to learn a computer program? 3 months, 6 months, a year? You will learn it. It's okay. But aesthetic judgment, color, composition, it's something that has to become intuitive. It's a tool you cultivate every day.
Yeah.
And it's something that only in a design school actually you will start understand how you can cultivate it further. Is it something that it's still matters today?
Absolutely. I mean, all good schools will talk about hand-heart-eye coordination, and that is both literal and symbolic. But of course, again, the secret is that there needs to be a kind of a filter, because a lot of schools say, oh, the industry will filter out the graduates. And it's a big mistake, because then if somebody is not fully committed, then they should be doing something that they really enjoy. There's no point in coming into this unless you're really madly, truly passionate about it. Because otherwise, it's much better doing something else. So those that are not fully committed, it's much more tricky. But those that are fully committed, wherever they are, if they wish to learn, it'll happen. It'll happen. But hand-eye coordination, because computer is like is a tool. It's not the designer. It'll never be the designer.
And in your view, behind that being passionate, what other skills do you think a young designer should develop during their studies?
During their studies, yeah, I think it's the way that they look at themselves. If they need to look at themselves as a designer, as a practicing designer, because if they do that, they're going to make the contacts. They're going to go into the companies. They're going to ask for the mentors. I remember myself. I was in my first year, and I always started contacting the industry, the publishers, the advertising agencies, because they need to see themselves as a designer who's just getting better, as an artist, as an illustrator, as a photographer who's just getting better, not as a student of something. Once they do that, and once they want to cultivate, their drawing skills, their observation skills, their ideas, it's going to lead them, but they need to take themselves really seriously and realize how precious the time they're having to really experiment. The one thing that most students say in their final years is, I wish I had spent more time experimenting, playing, because then they realize, oh my God, time is running out. And they say, okay, oh my God, I've got to get a portfolio, I've got to get connections. But this needs to happen from the first year. CV, portfolio, even it can be tiny, but, contacting mentors, contacting the industry, how is this? What do I need to do for you to hire me in 2 or 3 years' time? That'd be an excellent question. To contact the industry and say, what do you want to see from me? What do you need to see from my portfolio? At the same time, it shouldn't be too corporate. At the same time, they need to find their own voice and experiment and not just try to produce what the industry wants, because industry, this changes, this can change. So they need to have an inner voice. They need to discover what it is they want to develop. So it's a balance between keeping something, a commercial portfolio, but also having an experimental approach in their own private work.
I understand that your role is to enhance that skills and give them guidance, but actually you can never be specific. You just draw a frame and help them to evolve in that frame.
I think when design education is a one-to-one practice, so because it happens on a one-to-one, it is easy to give very, very direct and specific advice. So that's why it doesn't happen in larger numbers, where although some schools have tried. If you have a class above 20 students, it becomes very difficult. But when class sizes are good, like around 15, 16 students, then of course the advice is personal, and it gets more personal the more they develop.
Since you talk about classes and the education system, design, in my perspective, has evolved in something which is multidimensional, interdisciplinary. How does this shift affect teaching? What changes in content or methodology happened?
That's an excellent question. I think that a lot of colleagues see design as something that's independent, and that's a grave mistake. Design will always be in the body of art. So once the best schools still start from art. So they start from art and then go to design. From art to design is a journey. If the student has made that journey, then they have a much better picture. But if a student has studied design in isolation, then they're missing a huge chunk. They're missing most of the story. So students, yes, they right now in a visual communication course, the students can go fine art to very strict typography, or use their skills to create businesses. I've had many graduates that used the design skill, but they were very conscious about it, to create successful business that had nothing to do with design, because they're using the skills from design thinking, but having applied them to design something, because many talk about design thinking without ever having designed anything. So it becomes a little bit irrelevant. It's not a panacea, design thinking. You have to have applied it and understand how that it relates to actually designing something. But the range is huge, but only if the students have gone from art to design.
Can students in our days evaluate the schools, and how do they have the tools? How do you would you suggest to them to evaluate the schools they are planning to go and study design? Because through your words, I understood that you can find a lot of variations in and approaches in education and institutions. Which are the best, or how you choose them?
That's a difficult one. I think that it's the inner compass. The inner compass will get the student through no matter what. One of the most important things is contact time. They need to really understand that this can't be something they do for 10 hours a week. If they're going to commit to studying design at higher education level, they need to make sure that they devote that amount of time. Even if their school is teaching them for, let's say, 10 hours or 7 hours, they need to understand that they need to triple or quadruple that time on their own. So yeah, it's really an attitude more rather than the school. Because there are advantages, for example, to free government schools. There are certain advantages and disadvantages. And there are certain advantages to private school and disadvantages. So it's more about their inner thirst. And if they need to be asking more people, they need to be, again, contacting industry mentors. They need to be able, basically, in the time that they're studying, they need to be able to speak design. That's what I say. If they can, the confidence to speak design. You ask many students, who's your favorite artist or designers? And they can't answer that question, which is by that time, that they haven't gone deep enough. Because a graduate doesn't need to rediscover the wheel. They can start by copying a mentor. And then through that, they can find their own voice, where they stand. But they need to try out various techniques. They need to try their abilities. Oh, how do you do that? They can deconstruct something, a poster, an app, anything. They can deconstruct and try to put it back together themselves. And through that, they learn. So, the school, while many schools might appear shiny or, big names or famous, unfortunately, in our day, this is not always the case. The most famous or the most shiny school is not necessarily the best school for them. They need to look for substance. They need to look for colleagues that care. They need to look for contact time. They need to really, ideally talk to the colleagues and talk to the students. And you said about how do they, about evaluating. It's complicated to evaluate because we say things that the student will understand in 5, 10, 15, much later on. So I say something, it goes in, but my students have told me, you were saying that, and 3, 4, 5, 6 years later, I got it. But the seed was inside. They had the seed. So it's very hard for students to evaluate, but they should still look at the graduates, look at the work, look at the employability. Of course, these are good criteria. Talk both to the staff and the graduates and the students currently studying. So yeah, they need to just do their best. But certain things that we say to the students, we don't say them for this minute right now. We say them for the future. The seed germinates and grows inside.
I will try to be more, to give me something more specific here. Mm-hmm. You mentioned that art, you believe that art is something that all design schools should have in their program. So, are there any specific lessons that they might look in the programs of the schools, like art you mentioned, or
Well,
I don't know, design thinking or
I
branding,
mean,
or
drawing and history of art and design. Drawing and even painting, because it unlocks a very different. Because it's drawing. It's not drawing to draw likenesses. The drawing we're doing in the design schools, in the good design schools, is drawing as evidence of looking. The drawing becomes the evidence of the student's observation. It's something very different to, going to an art class. Oh, that looks just like a photograph. It's nothing to do with that. It's not, cultivating drawing to draw likeness. It's cultivating drawing skills to heighten and to sharpen the observation skills of the student.
This discussion made me very nostalgic. I would say something, sorry for that. It's supposed to, the host doing all the questions, but let me say a personal story. Actually, graphic design was not something that I had in mind when I started. Actually, my first selection was to become a pilot. So when I went to the school and all the teachers started to asking in the first day what you wanted to do, and they came to me and I said pilot, one teacher said, okay, you came here with parachute. And although I seemed like someone who wouldn't ever go forward on that, they were open. The teachers were open. They never looked at me like someone who actually wouldn't go through because he wasn't a talented guy. Or every time they were talking, they never judged my work. And I am sure it was pretty bad in the beginning. But they, as you said, they made me starting to think with open mind. It was very helpful because actually I didn't have any background. My parents, my family, any art background. But the teachers there made me to love design and art. They were very open always and trying to move forward things and helping with synthesis and composition. And I remember the first time they gave us an exam, I don't know the English word, matiera.
For a technique, for a kind of a technique.
Yeah, to do something like that. And they said, this drawing have to look like Africa, but with colors. And I say, how can I make Africa with colors only? And they helped me. And it was a turning point because at the end of that exercise, I could see Africa without seeing Africa. It was an amazing turning point. And I started to understand how art can work and make you more open-minded. Sorry about me mumbling, but it was truly nostalgic listening to you and the passion you have. And I really like that. This is, I think, also part of the role of an educator, to keep an open mind and help designers do that. And if you're passionate, as you said, things will come.
Yes.
It is amazing how art works in our mind. I understand that, okay, we both agree that art is a huge part of design education. But also I think that you have to admit that technical skills are within that area.
Yes, absolutely.
Where do you place that skills?
I mean, the cultivation of skills is very important because it's what you're going to exchange. You're exchanging skills for employment or for some kind of reward. I think that, we encourage students to go as wide as possible. So they need to have skills in a wide area, but also dig deeper in a specific area they want to specialize. So it's also both wide and deep in a specific area of their choice. Because, they should experiment with many things. So learning many skills, like 3D, video editing, sort of coding, whatever, so they can have an idea. But one of these should be very, very, very sharp. They should have gone quite deep.
let me be practical here. In our days, of course, everybody's talking about AI. Do you think that art schools should put AI in their programs right now? Yesterday?
I mean, you mean the skill of prompting? Yeah. I mean, if somebody knows what they're doing, then they can use AI in a constructive way. It's like, if you know what you're doing, if you have written, if you have designed, then you can, of course, although AI now seems to be much better at writing than at designing, but I'm sure the time will come when it'll be better at designing as well. But you have to know what you're doing. So if you've done it yourself and you're comfortable with doing it yourself, and then of course for the execution part. But right now, for example, the AI is not thinking like a designer. It's thinking more like a programmer. So yeah, for ideas, you still need to know the structure of design and design thinking process. But for execution, right now, of course. In fact, towards the final year, maybe students should be experimenting, but they should also spend time knowing how to do everything by themselves as well.
Having traveled around the world and teaching around the world, do you think there is a particular teaching model that you find more successful, or something you really like most than the others?
I think wherever rigor is encouraged, wherever skills and rigor are encouraged, then you get better systems. So, and wherever there is a kind of a filter, as I said before, some of the private schools say, "Oh, we're going to put the filter at the end." What do I mean by that? Who becomes successful and who doesn't, and we're going to let the market forces sort them out. But then the student has already spent maybe 3 or 4 years of the best time of their life into something that they're not necessarily good at. So I think that wherever rigor is encouraged and wherever the filter is put in the front, because if the school says, no, you shouldn't be doing that, then you might think about it. Maybe I should do something else. Maybe there's a reason for that. It's like, as you said about the pilot, on certain planes, you have to be below a certain height. You can't be 6 feet and want to fly an F-16. I think it's 1.60 meters, isn't it, the limit?
Yes, I think
so. If you're, this is what I say, if you're 1.75 meters, and no matter how much you want to fly an F-16, you don't fit in the cabin. You don't fit in the plane. So it's something like that. I think people should have a broad mind and not think that, right now we have the idea that people can do everything. And it's not necessarily true. It's quite misleading. I think everybody's very talented and they can excel at something, for sure. But they need to find that something that they can excel. And maybe if it's not design, maybe they should look at something else.
And did you find that in countries you visited, you have taught up to
I think every country,
UK or Spain, or
I think every country has got, it's hard to generalize like that. I think every country has got good schools.
Oh, so it depends on the schools.
Yes, but I think that whenever you see a school that has a large intake, and all of a sudden you find yourself in a class with 80 people and one member of staff, it's very difficult. It's impossible for the teacher.
Yeah.
But I think that wherever there is rigor and wherever there is a filter, wherever there is, in the older days, in the UK, for example, they used to get, in the School of Architecture, they used to get 200 architects in the first year and say, look, next year there'll be 100 of you. And by the third year, there'll be 50. And then by after our IBA and blah, 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 there were 8 architects 7 years later. And there were 200 people to begin with. So you need a filter in the front, because that challenge makes you better. Otherwise, in some schools, students get too complacent. And it's a shame, because they're spending the best years of their life not sharpening their skills. So for those students, they need to go somewhere else. And it's better if they're not in education. It's better if they really find what they're good at, because I believe that everybody is amazing at something. But sometimes people get the wrong idea of what they're amazing at. And it's up to us, it's up It's up to mentors. It's up to people, other people that can see that, their parents, of course, to help them find what that thing is.
Also, through your travel and your experience, do you notice differences in the level of the background of students depending on their country of origin? Once again, I don't want to be generalizing things,
of course.
I mean, I understand that each educational system probably has a certain role in art and design education, even from elementary school. So in a way, it cultivates design thinking and art thinking in people. Have you found any countries that...
There is. I mean, in certain European countries, in certain countries around the world, art and design is more encouraged than other countries. And of course, that introduces potential students to that, and they know about it. It's like, like you said, 35 years ago, there was no talk about really graphics in a way we talk about it today. But of course, some countries have stopped teaching art and design in their curriculum. So again, it's very hard then for students to know that it exists.
Where do you place Greece in that?
It's a very tricky situation, isn't it? I mean, we have it has to be an extracurricular activity. I mean, again, certain schools do better art and design art than others. Still, I can't generalize because I don't know what is being done at schools. But I think it depends on the specific school. Again, I've heard that there are schools with amazing teachers that really try to do their best, and schools that they don't have that. So I can't, I don't know what the situation is, but in Greece it tends to be always something that needs to be cultivated outside usually.
Does this, I mean, how the students come to your classes from their background and what they believe and their passion affect the way you approach them, the way you approach it, the teaching, or the way
not at all. No, I see the potential. Students that show potential, and that comes from any background. And in certain countries where it's more of an egalitarian situation, so where you get students from all backgrounds, that's the ideal environment of being in a class where you have students from all backgrounds, because it's much more interesting, and even better if they're from different countries, because then you get different viewpoints.
Yeah, that must be amazing for you.
but it's about their ability. Sometimes it's surprising, somebody that has a talent. And I mean, recently I had some students which were extremely talented to a level that I haven't seen before. But the students don't know it, and you can't. So it's up to the educator how they handle that. Because if you have an extremely talented student, then it's even more tricky. Because if they're usually, in design education right now, in most cases, it's like training, a team that has multiple levels. And it's very difficult because, there's 20% of the team that's really, really good. There is the 50% of the team that's okay. And there is the other 20% it's debatable if they shouldn't be there at all. So you have to kind of balance an environment like that. There are very few schools, that, okay, they get like the top 10 amazing. And that's a different story. They get 20 or 10 students or 20 students or 15 students, and they've been selected from 200 or 300 or 500, or that's a different story again, because then you have a different situation there.
Let me ask you that: have you ever came across with someone who is so talented? You mentioned that now you have some very, very talented students, that you think that you have to, that maybe your guidance is not enough?
No, of course not. There's a big problem with the talented students, is that from a commercial point of view, from an employability point of view, is that in industry, really, the ones who make it are those that are average and slightly better than average, because they can communicate with the average consensus of visual art, visual communication. They can engage with that. If somebody is super talented, they're in their own world, literally. And they're not understood by everyone. And they don't have the skills. Ideally, I had students I tried to help that were super talented. But it was much more difficult for them because they needed like an agent, to be with them, to look after them, to guide them at all times. Because it's like if somebody's super talented in one area, they're not so talented in other areas. So it's a kind of an imbalance almost. That they're amazing at something, but they're not very good at other things. So the ones that traditionally succeed are those that are above average. And of course, they do all the hard work, of course, So it's not about how talented they are. It's more about the persistence. It's much more about the persistence. Success is about persistence and about doing something every day over a long period of time, rather than having the talent, because the talent comes too easy, or it might be so good that nobody understands it, except save the few people that can see it.
Mm-hmm.
But from an employability point of view, it's more difficult.
If you had the magic wand and you could change something tomorrow in the design education system, what this would be?
I mean, where do I start? Now, it depends. It depends on what is already there. I think overall, the biggest problem is that design education has been over theoretized. We have the influx of higher number of theoreticians, and it becomes more theoretical. So right now, in many places, it's like somebody, is getting a degree, wants to learn swimming, and so they said, okay, you have to read this book on swimming. You get a BA on swimming, you write the essays on swimming, and then you pass because you've written this amazing essay, And then you have a master's, you write a bigger thesis on swimming, and then of course you go to. So somebody says, okay, go to the swimming pool. Now you have a master's, and you go and drown. Yeah, because you've been taught by people who have never swam.
Great example.
You have to learn swimming in the swimming pool, and by people who have been swimming for a long time. So bookish knowledge, theoretical knowledge. Well, as I say, design has 25, maybe 20. Let's call it 30. Let's call it 30% of theoretical knowledge. It's very important. But the rest 70% is practice-based. And if that's missing, there's a huge problem. So I'll start by readdressing that balance between theory and practice. And from then on, many good things can happen. But when you have people that have only done theory, or who have never even done design, but just happen to have a PhD on something, go into this system and try to help students. It's not always successful. I think that's the greatest imbalance right now.
The example with the swimming was amazing. So let's go a little bit towards branding. What do you think is the relationship between design and branding from an educational point of view? And let me be more clear on that. I believe that branding is something that involves all the disciplines in the communication industry. Branding is done by advertising agencies, by PR agencies, strategists. Everybody, in a way, from their perspective, are building a brand, so they are doing branding. And of course, design is a huge part of that, because a lot of things, in the end of the day, come to be implemented in visual communication. And actually, most of the branding and design agencies started from designers, and until now, when we usually talk about branding and design, we mention and we mean agencies that they have their roots in designers. But what do you think that there is a connection between design and branding in education today? How the education approaches
Yeah,
branding?
that's a good question. I mean, I think it's related to what I said before. I think if branding is taught by branding professionals, because as you know really well, design is like one of the few last stages of branding. You have research, and it's nothing to do with visuals. So branding is a specific process that needs to be taught and learned by professionals. And that process of research into ideas, into whatever, and then so design is really towards the end of branding. A lot of individuals more or some do branding visually. So whenever branding is done visually, it ends up in a disaster. It ends up because it hasn't grown organically. It hasn't grown through the research, through the mission, through the vision, through the values. So if branding is taught by branding professionals in education, and again, sometimes these professionals are not encouraged to participate in education. They're discouraged because, again, you have people that are teaching that haven't actually branded anything. So whenever you get people that have done it, or guest lecturers or guest designers to teach branding in a proper way, then of course it can work. But again, you need to involve the professionals.
That's true, and I truly agree on that. So, if we can sum up with your role, with the role of a design professor today. You mentioned theorists, you mentioned a mentor, you mentioned facilitator, accelerator. Can you find one word? I know it's difficult to characterize. It might be very optimistic.
Okay. The role of a design educator.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think it's just somebody that brings out something that's already there. Because the student is doing all the work. The student is doing all the learning. We're not doing any teaching. We're facilitating something and cultivating something but there needs to be a seed. There needs to be something already.
Yeah.
The sooner the students realize that they're doing all the learning by themselves, the faster they're going to accelerate. Because we point, we say, okay, there's this, but we expect the students to go and look at each of these points and go deeper. So yeah, I would say that the student is doing all the learning by themselves. We are the facilitators. We just amplify something what is already there.
Let's become a little bit again nostalgic, and if it is you that you could go back in time in your own studies, what skills do you wish your teacher had and they didn't?
Okay, that's a very good question. We were taught to excel at what we did. So we became really good designers, really good, but we weren't taught any of the portfolio building skills or the CV building skills. Portfolio we did, sorry, but, physical portfolio. So no CV, not so much professional skills. But there was a reason for that, because there was really no time. I think that there is, some universities, and this is something I've been teaching for a long time, there's a professional development practice class. But if done properly, most good graduates can find a job before graduating. So they get 3 years or 3 or 4 years of whatever of that. So yeah, a little bit more professional development practice to talk about CV, to talk about a little bit more. But no, I think that making sure that the students are on a very high level. I think that my school was amazing at the time. So yeah, some schools, a little bit like 10% of that would have been amazing. But other than that, at the time it was a very different time. But yeah, it was an amazing. We were members of a commando course at the time. It was really brutal, but it was but it produced some amazing results.
That's great. Do you have a quote that you usually say to your students?
Oh, I have many quotes. But, nothing comes to mind right now. Quotes, yes, I have many quotes. I mean, I think Paul Rand has some very nice. There's a book called Advice to Students, or anything by Paul Rand, because he was, I think, a rare individual who was an amazing designer and an amazing educator. It was a combination that I don't think has been repeated. So if students look at if people that are interested look at the work of Paul Rand, Conversations with Students, I think is a really good book, because it has a number of gems. For example, our hands is what differentiates us from a cow. Sort of using our hands, in design and things like that. But it's really inspirational. I think Paul Rand has tons of inspiration in that specific book.
Oh, so you covered also my next question. Which book would you suggest that young students should must read? Not
absolutely.
Should, must read.
Paul Rand, Conversations with Students, and of course, Phil Cleaver, Professor Phil Cleaver. What They Didn't Teach You in Design School. It's a really comprehensive and amazing book by Professor Phil Cleaver.
Lefteri, thank you very, very much. It was a truly amazing discussion we had today. I remember my old years in school, and was really made me sentimental.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It was a real pleasure. Thank you. I really enjoyed that conversation.
I hope our audience could learn a lot and get value from our discussion, especially young people, students, or designers. Will be very helpful for them. To everyone listening, thank you again for tuning in. If you found this discussion inspiring, feel free to share it, follow the podcast, and stay tuned for the episodes to come. Until next time, remember, everything does branding. Dear Lefteris, thank you very much. It was great having you.
Thanks so much.
Let's begin.
Ακούσατε ένα ακόμη podcast της σειράς Branding for Greeks με τον Γιώργο Καραγιάννη. Μέχρι το επόμενο, σας εύχομαι καλή συνέχεια. Και μην ξεχνάτε, τα πάντα κάνουν branding.